Picture this, it's a 1946 Texarkana, this town that's right on the border of Texas and Arkansas, kind of split between the two, and it's buzzing with energy. The nation's rebuilding after World War II. There's this feeling of relief in the air. Everybody's sharing hope for a brighter future. But under the moonlight, a darkness is brewing, a terror that will stain the town's history forever.
Yeah, it's a chilling contrast, isn't it? You have this optimism, this hope, and then lurking beneath it is this unspeakable evil that's about to unfold.
Exactly. And it all begins on a quiet February night. A young couple, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larray, they're parked on this secluded lover's lane, lost in their own world. Suddenly, a figure emerges from the shadows, just shattering the peace.
Like something out of a nightmare. You're in this private, intimate space, and then suddenly you're confronted with pure evil.
Yeah, armed and masked. This assailant just brutally attacks them. Jimmy and Mary Jean, they survive. But their terrifying ordeal, it marks the beginning of a nightmare for Texarkana over the next few months. 3 more couples are attacked in similar circumstances, but this time with fatal consequences.
And the killer, he's dubbed the Phantom Killer because he's so elusive, and because of this white mask he wears, he vanishes into the night after each attack, and the community is just paralyzed by fear.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.
We're so glad you're joining us for this deep dive into one of the most haunting, unsolved cases in American history, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders.
It's a case that really gets under your skin. You know how quickly darkness can descend on a place that's yearning for peace. Can you imagine living in Texarkana at that time? The constant fear, the suspicion, the dread that settled over the town as the sun began to set.
I think what's so unsettling about this case is how it preys on our vulnerability in those moments of intimacy and escape, Lovers' lanes, places meant for romantic rendezvous, they were transformed into hunting grounds. The very act of seeking solace and connection became fraught with danger.
Yeah, and it all started with that attack on Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larray. Thankfully, they survived. Their experience, it really set the stage for what was to come.
And Mary Jean's description of the attacker wearing a white mask, that's what really fueled that whole phantom imagery. It's almost as if this faceless assailant was suddenly given this chilling, almost spectral identity.
Right. It's like he became a figure straight out of a horror story lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike. And tragically, he did strike the next attack, claimed the lives of Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, another young couple seeking a moment of privacy.
And that escalation of violence, that's a classic hallmark of serial predators. There's this sense of testing boundaries, pushing the limits of what they can get away with, the fact that the Phantom went from a brutal assault to a double homicide. It indicates this terrifying progression in his modus operandi.
It's heartbreaking to think about what those victims went through and the sheer terror that must have gripped the town. And then came the third attack on Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker.
And this particular crime scene had a detail that has puzzled investigators for decades: a missing saxophone. Paul was a musician. He had his instrument with him that night, and it was never recovered. It raises some fascinating questions about the killer's psychology.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. What could the missing saxophone tell us about the Phantom?
Well, in some serial crimes, killers take trophies, objects that serve as tangible reminders of their acts, almost like souvenirs. The saxophone could fit that profile. It might have held some personal significance for the victim, making it even more desirable to the killer as a memento. But there's also another theory.
What's that?
Some experts believe that the saxophone might have been taken out of practicality to silence any potential noise that could alert others to the crime. It's a chilling thought, but it speaks to a level of planning and forethought that's often seen in organized offenders.
Either way, it's a disturbing detail that adds another layer of complexity to this case. And then there's the attack on Virgil and Katie Starks, which marked a terrifying shift in the Phantom's pattern.
Absolutely. Up until this point, the attacks had all occurred in secluded lovers' lanes, places that were already perceived as risky after dark. But with the Starks, the Phantom invaded their home, shattering the illusion of safety that even a locked door might have provided.
It's like he was saying, nowhere is safe. The fear must have been unimaginable. Imagine you're a resident of Texarkana at this time. How do you even begin to cope with that level of terror?
It would have been absolutely paralyzing. Every shadow would hold a potential threat. Every car backfiring would sound like a gunshot. People began arming themselves, installing extra locks, avoiding going out after dark. The town was essentially living under siege, and the worst part was they had no idea who or what they were up against.
It's a chilling thought to be living in that kind of fear where every sunset brings a new wave of dread.
The entire town was just plunged into this state of Chaos and paranoia. It wasn't just the fear of the phantom himself, but, the ripple effects of that fear, the mistrust, the shattered sense of community. It's a stark reminder of just how fragile our sense of safety can be and how quickly it can unravel.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder, how do you even begin to investigate a case like this, especially back in 1946 with the limited forensic technology they had?
That's a great question. The Texarkana police, along with the Arkansas State Police and even the Texas Rangers, they were thrown into this whirlwind of an investigation, but they were facing some serious challenges right from the start.
Like, what were some of those limitations they had to deal with?
Well, for one, fingerprinting technology was in its infancy back then, even if they had found prints at the crime scenes, which was unlikely given that most of the attacks happened outdoors. And, the limited understanding of trace evidence preservation they had at the time, matching those prints to a suspect, would have been a monumental task.
So they were basically working with, like, a fraction of the tools that modern-day investigators have at their disposal.
Exactly. And DNA analysis, which is, a cornerstone of modern criminal investigations, wasn't even a concept back then. So they had to rely heavily on eyewitness accounts, which, as we know, can be notoriously unreliable, especially in high-stress situations like these.
Plus, the attacks happened at night in dimly lit areas, which probably made it even harder for witnesses to accurately describe the assailant.
Precisely. And on top of that, you had conflicting descriptions from the surviving victims, adding another layer of complexity to the investigation. Some described the phantom as tall, others as average height. Some said he was heavyset, others lean. It was this jumbled puzzle of details that didn't quite fit together.
With all those limitations, it's almost a miracle they were able to develop any leads at all. Do they have any suspects?
They did, and one suspect in particular stood out, a young man named Ewell Swinney. He was a petty thief with a history of run-ins with the law, car thefts, things like that. And there was some circumstantial evidence linking him to the crimes.
What kind of circumstantial evidence are we talking about?
Well, Swinney's wife provided an alibi for him during the first few attacks, but she later recanted her statement, claiming that he had pressured her to lie. And get this, he was apparently quite skilled at mimicking voices, which could connect him to those phone calls that some victims reported receiving before the attacks.
That sounds like they had enough to at least bring him in for questioning, right?
Oh, absolutely. He was arrested and subjected to multiple polygraph tests, which he reportedly failed. But here's where things get really complicated. Polygraph results weren't admissible in court back then, and the other evidence, while suggestive, was deemed insufficient to secure a conviction.
So they had a suspect, but they couldn't make the charges stick. That must have been incredibly frustrating for the investigators and for the terrified residents of Texarkana.
Oh, you can imagine the frustration, the sense of helplessness. It's like having all the puzzle pieces but not being able to put them together in a way that satisfies the strict requirements of the legal system.
And what about Swinney? What happened to him?
He was ultimately convicted of car theft and served time in prison, but he was never charged with the Moonlight murders, and to this day, the case officially remains unsolved.
That's just mind-boggling to think that this shadowy figure, the Phantom, was able to terrorize an entire community and just vanish without a trace, leaving only questions and fear in his wake.
And that's what makes this case so enduringly fascinating. It's not just about the brutality of the crimes, but the enduring mystery. The Phantom became this symbol of the unknown, of the darkness that can lurk just beyond the edges of our perception.
It's like he tapped into some primal fear, a fear of the unseen of the predator that could strike at any moment in any place.
Exactly. And that fear, that sense of vulnerability, it has resonated with people for decades, fueling countless theories, books, documentaries, and even a Hollywood film.
Speaking of the film, the 1976 movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, while fictionalized, brought the Texarkana Moonlight murders to a wider audience. Did the movie help or hinder the investigation?
That's a complex question. On one hand, it renewed interest in the case and brought it back into the public consciousness, which could have potentially led to new tips or information. But on the other hand, it also blurred the lines between fact and fiction, creating this sort of sensationalized version of events that may have obscured the truth.
So it might have inadvertently muddied the waters, making it even harder to separate what really happened from the Hollywood version?
Precisely. It's a dilemma that often arises when true crime cases are adapted for entertainment. How do you stay true to the facts while also crafting a compelling narrative? It's a delicate balance.
And in a case like this, where the truth is already so elusive, the balance becomes even more crucial.
Absolutely. And beyond the film, the Texarkana Moonlight murders have become ingrained in local folklore, passed down through generations. The whispers, the rumors, the what-ifs, they all contribute to this collective memory that keeps the case alive.
It's almost like the fear itself has become a legacy, a part of the town's identity. But what about the victims? It's easy to get caught up in the mystery, but we can't forget the human cost of these crimes.
You're absolutely right. Behind the headlines, behind the speculation, were real people whose lives were tragically cut short or forever altered by the events of that spring and summer in 1946.
It's important to remember that to acknowledge the pain and suffering that these crimes inflicted on individuals, families, and an entire community.
And it's a reminder that even in the face of unspeakable horror, the human spirit can endure. Texarkana, despite the shadow of the phantom, continued to rebuild, to heal, to find ways to move forward.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, our ability to find hope and strength even in the darkest of times. But there's still that nagging question, will we ever know the truth about the Phantom Killer?
That's the million-dollar question. Isn't it some believe that with advancements in forensic science, particularly DNA technology, there's still a chance that this case could be cracked wide open?
It's fascinating to think about what modern investigators could do with the evidence, even decades later. Could they extract DNA from old crime scene materials? Could they finally put a name and a face to the Phantom?
It's certainly a possibility, but even if they did, would it truly bring closure, or would it simply open up a new chapter in this chilling saga? It's a thought-provoking question that continues to haunt anyone who delves into the depths of the Texarkana moonlight murders.
Yeah, it really does make you think, what would if I were an investigator on this case today?
Well, that's a question that's probably crossed the minds of a lot of armchair detectives and true crime enthusiasts. Over the years, the allure of the unknown, that challenge of cracking a cold case, it's definitely a powerful draw.
So let's say, you're an investigator today and you have all the modern forensic tools at your disposal. Where would you even begin with a case like this?
Well, I think the first step would be to revisit that original evidence. Even the smallest trace of DNA could potentially blow this case wide open. And luckily, advancements in DNA extraction techniques mean that even tiny samples from decades-old crime scenes can now yield viable profiles.
So there's hope that even something like a blood stain, a hair fiber, a touch DNA sample could lead to a major breakthrough.
Oh, absolutely. And even beyond DNA, modern forensic techniques like ballistics analysis, fiber comparison, even digital facial reconstruction, they could all shed new light on old evidence.
Wow, so it's like having this whole new set of tools to unlock the secrets of the past.
Right, like imagine re-examining those bullets from the crime scenes, comparing them to any firearms that Ewell Swinney might have had access to, or analyzing the fibers from that mask that Mary Jean Larrey described, seeing if they match any known materials from that era.
It's like opening up a time capsule with forensic possibilities. But even if you were able to identify the Phantom, wouldn't there be some legal hurdles to actually bringing charges after all these years?
Yeah, that's a good point. Statutes of limitations.
Yeah.
Those time limits for filing charges for specific crimes can definitely be a major obstacle in cold cases. But some crimes, especially homicides, might not have a statute of limitations, or the time limit could be paused under certain circumstances. It all depends on the specific laws in Texas and Arkansas at the time and how those laws have evolved over time.
So even if you had a name, you'd still need to navigate all those legal complexities of prosecuting a case that's over 70 years old.
Exactly, but let's not get bogged down in the legal what-ifs. I think what's truly captivating about this case is that it forces us to confront some fundamental questions about human nature. What drives a person to commit such brutal acts? What makes a monster?
It's a disturbing thought, but it's also a question that's fascinated criminologists and psychologists for centuries, right? Is there a phantom lurking within all of us, just waiting for the right circumstances to emerge?
Ooh. Now that's getting into some deep philosophical territory, but it's definitely a question worth pondering. I think the Texarkana moonlight murders, they serve as this stark reminder that darkness can exist even in the most seemingly idyllic settings.
It reminds us that evil can lurk in those shadows, and that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are the ones that we never truly see.
Very true. It's a sobering thought, but it's also a reminder to be vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to really cherish those moments of peace and connection that we have.
Absolutely. Well, we've only scratched the surface of this complex case, but if you're as captivated as we are, we encourage you to check out the show notes for some further reading and resources.
There's so much more to explore with this case, historical accounts, investigative reports, even some fascinating theories about the Phantom's identity.
And if you're looking for even more content on true crime, be sure to follow CrimePod Castle for more episodes of Twisted Crime.
We're always on the lookout for new and intriguing cases, stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.
And for exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes looks, and even some spooky visuals, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
We'll see you there.
Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.
And as always,
Keep those lights on